Welcome to our lecture series, The World in 2050. As always, we have a very interesting speaker, besides a very interested audience. This time, it is the turn of Karl Peterlini. Karl Peterlini is the UNESCO Chair on Global Citizenship, Culture of Diversity and Peace at the University of Klagenfurt in Austria. Karl is a professor of general education and intercultural education at the Alpen-Adria Universität there. His research focuses on ethnic and linguistic diversity in nation-state contexts, personal and social learning in schools and society, transformative education and inclusion processes in migrant-dominated societies. Since 2020, Karl-Hans has been the holder of the UNESCO Chair, Global Citizenship, Education, Culture of Diversity and Peace. And today he will talk to us about the necessary, potential, possible transformation of education for 2050. So what is needed to prepare us education-wide for a new world that is emerging? Now, in all this, we have quite a special situation today because Karl is hindered to participate in person. So therefore, he has sent us a recording that he has featured specifically for us and for this occasion. So Karl has tailored his lecture to this event, and we are grateful for this. Nevertheless, please feel free to ask your questions at the end, as always, in the chat function. I will be back after his lecture. We collect all the questions you may have so that Karl gets some feedback, and perhaps we can feed this in together with the loop of his answers next time or in the next occasion that presents itself. And with this, I give the stage to Karl Peterlini's lecture, Transforming Education for 2050.
Dear colleagues at this excellent lecture series, dear Roland Benedicta, dear team of the Eurac UNESCO Chair at Bozen-Bolzano, I'm very grateful to participate in this interesting lecture series, and at the same time, I have to apologize for only speaking to you through a recording. This does not allow for discussion with me at the end, but perhaps stimulates you to talk among yourself. I shortly try to open my presentation. Yes, the presentation is about transforming education for 2050 and beyond, setting the course in the present for a better future. Even if our topic points far into the future and has a global claim, it seems important to me to say briefly from which point of view I speak about this topic. I represent the educational science in Klagenfurt in Austria, in the region of Carinthia. You see it on the map at the border to Slovenia and Italy. We have a tradition in dealing with questions of living together, with ethnic troubles on the one side and resources of understanding at the other side. The Alps-Adriatic region on the threshold to the Balkans, with its German, Slovenian, Italian language, is an area of ethnic and cultural encounter and demarcation. Working in such contexts demands an openness for transnational global perspectives in order not to get into ethnocentric dynamics, as we know it similarly also in South Tyrol, as an area with German, Italian, and Latin language group, a country which came by First World War from the former Austrian monarchy to Italy, That is where I grew up. That is where I spent a large part of my professional life dealing with questions of hostility and living together, of understanding and misunderstanding. The engagement with these questions led us at Klagenfurt University to apply for a UNESCO Chair on global citizenship, education, culture, and diversity and peace. It takes the regional experiences with issues of culture and ethnicity and puts them into a global perspective. Just a look at our website. The central question is, what can we contribute to this paradigmatic shift from national frameworks of education towards a global responsibility as citizens of the earth? We understand global citizenship education as an approach of hope, as a kind of educational lighthouse versus the famous Tower of Babylon, as a metaphor for the world, a world deeply mired in post-colonial skewness, contrary to all alleged attempts to come to terms with colonialism and its grave crimes and enduring exploitations, a world at war, and not just since Putin's war of aggression on Ukraine, in which an elite in the dominant states earns from war, in which the prosperity of the global north is often due to the outsourcing of production costs, unhealthy production methods, environmental damage, climate impacts, and literally waste to the global south. And global north and global south are not to understand as only geographic terms, but they means the global injustice and inequality. There could be also a global north in the global south, in the south, and the global south in the north. Yes, and unfortunately, the global north, wherever it is, answers with inhuman coldness when war, economic, or climate refugees come from these countries damaged by colonialism. But at the same time, from the perspectives of educational science and learning theory, the question arises, how can this paradigm that we need for necessary, this paradigm shift, how can this paradigm shift be done? How can we bring about this understanding of global citizenship? How can we make citizens with planetary consciousness, make only intended as a provocation? Learning is not as easily accessible by teaching as some educational approaches promise. It is still an unexplored and mysterious miracle. How, when, and what people learn by being educated or don't. We have no secure grip on it. These are questions we ask ourselves in research projects, in our theoretical work, and very concretely also with students, especially in a master's program on global citizenship education that is unique in Europe. In 2020, we received the Genie Award for this from the Global Education Network Europe. The concept of global citizenship education has more than one origin story and basement, a more programmatic and political one, and the more pedagogical scientific one. On the level of a programmatic political approach, the task seems clear and is also not at all new, but very prominently given. Isaac Asimov already stated in a well-received essay in 1972 that the problems of this world, the same global crisis we are talking about today, that this crisis of the world can only be solved by planetary strategies. In short, I'm reading the last sentence. In short, problems of planetary scale require a planetary program and a planetary solution. The same year, the Club of Rome warned the world about what now is reality. And the message, see the present website of the Club of Rome from this year, is always the same. What is needed is a vision of an interconnected world and a new way of being human that promotes well-being for all in a healthier ecosystem. This is, of course, known to all of you, and it's very close to the idea of global citizenship education. An outstanding pioneer is the French philosopher Edgar Morin. Here are some of his works about the vision of homeland Earth, which includes perspectives of global citizenship and more careful relations to the Earth as Gaia, as system. We could say it is a holistic vision of a new way for humans to deal with each other and with the Earth. At 101 years of age, Edgar Morin is still an ardent advocate of his vision. Partially parallel, partially overlapping, partially also contrasting with these programmatic political developments, the pedagogical subdisciplines have also emerged in different steps. You see at the screen political education, peace education, human rights education, then environmental education, democracy education, and the environmental education in its involving from eco-education to development education to the actual concept of education for sustainable development, and at least global education and global citizenship education as two very closed concepts. We can describe global citizenship education as an integrative approach to these political pedagogies in line with the Council of Europe's Maastricht Declaration of 2002. We can read it together. Global education is education that opens people's eyes and minds to the realities of the globalized world and awakens them to bring about a world of greater justice, equity, and human rights for all. Global education is understood to encompass development education, human rights education, education for sustainability, education for peace and conflict prevention, and intercultural education, being the global dimension of education for citizenship. A crucial frame of reference are, of course, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the UN Agenda 2030. Even if they are often viewed critically, they could be an interesting point of reference, of orientation. Education, defined as quality education, is presented as SDG 4 and targeted by different goals. As you see here, the most important principles are free and equal access to primary and pre-primary education, equal access to affordable technical, vocational, and higher education, to increase the number of people with relevant skills for financial success, elimination of discrimination, universal literacy and numeracy, inclusive and safe schools, expanding higher education, professionalization. And in target 4.7, we find the two concepts which together represent the vision for educational approaches, which should contribute to resolving the global crisis: education for sustainable development and global citizenship. For the UNESCO, global citizenship education is the response to the global crisis and challenges. While the world, I'm quoting, may be increasingly interconnected, human rights violations, inequality, and poverty still threaten peace and sustainability. Global citizenship education, GCED, is UNESCO's response to these challenges. it works by empowering learners of all ages to understand that these are global, not local issues, and to become active promoters of more peaceful, tolerant, inclusive, secure, and sustainable societies. This programmatic, of course, this is of course on a programmatic approach, and it has to be brought in a pedagogically founded concept. So I propose these definitions of global citizenship education. We can define global citizenship education as an approach which combines political education, peace education, and global learning, considering intercultural pedagogics and education for sustainable development. Overcoming, and this is an important point, overcoming methodological nationalism as a worldview that regards everything through the national lens, a planetary-orientated education for global responsibility and a cosmopolitan spin, a post-colonial critical approach with a planetary consciousness, dealing with coloniality as a result of and long-standing heritage of colonialism. The difference between colonialism and coloniality means that colonialism may be past, but coloniality is its persisting heritage, structuring our societies, structuring the world, the relationships all over the world, reflecting of one's own, often privileged living conditions, the so-called imperial mode of living, quoting Brandt and Wissen, and a pedagogical contribution to a more social, ecological transformation of society. All fine and dandy, but can education do this? Has education the power to realize such a change of society, such a change of paradigm? Education has limits, also shown in 1930 in an exemplary way by Siegfried Bernfeld in his work Sisyphus, or the limits of education. And he spoke about three limits of education. The one is by society. Education is not only an individual process. By the various differences of humans, we are not all equal, we are not all the same, we are functioning in different ways, and education is limited by the educators themselves and their unconscious shadows they have. And they are also led by this internalized stereotypes and experiences. And as we see, in some way, education is seen on the other side as the revolving door to all the other SDGs, which makes all other accessible for a better world. Behind this lies an overestimation that is also an overcharge for the pedagogical professionals. Education alone for itself can hardly make the world a better place. We have quality education in many countries of the global north, but do we change anything? Do we learn how to live better? Education can give a country good, and in the next parts of the presentation, I will try to find out ways for education to give its country good. But for its alone, if the other practices remain the same, education can't change the world for itself, can't be the only one transformative power which we would need. We see in this model by Dietrich Benner, a German educationalist, that education stands in a complex interaction with other human practices, such as economics, politics, religion, aesthetics, and ethics, according to the educationalist Benner. I have already quoted him. These 6 practices, idealistically, should be in a non-hierarchical relationship and work together. Still, the reality is often different and sees education as subordinated to economic, to political and other interests. The complexity of educational interactions between the learners, the society, and education and educating instances or educating offers has led the system theory, prominently Niklas Luhmann, first of all, has led the system theory to see a technology deficit in education, which means education lacks on technology. Education is not technology. It's not an art which functions according to the principles of causality. In education, we might not even have the input of what we are doing as educators. We don't have the input completely at our disposal, because we are also guided by our own stereotypes and previous experiences and have our blind spots. But we are completely deprived of the output of our actions. We simply cannot predict what consequences an educational intervention will have in the learner, which is a black box. Educational process cannot be controlled like trivial machines. They have to deal with the non-trivial human machine in its social complexity. Learning, and this is maybe an important aspect of learning theory, takes us across an abyss of which we are often unaware, but which prevents us from taking the leap across this abyss. It is the abyss between the no longer valid of the familiar, of the old knowledge, of the old behavior, and the not available of the new knowledge, behavior, way of life. This is also the case when people learn even one new language. They have to break away from the familiar language and entrust themselves to the new language, where words are missing, where they are afraid of making mistakes or being misunderstood. It is all the more true when people should change their lifestyles, their worldviews, their ideas of identity. They would have to give up the security of their national belonging, even if they realize that nation-state egoism has become fragile in a globalized world. It does not mean that they want to give it up. They do not know whether an economy based on solidarity, on global solidarity, is really possible, whether they do not lose more than they would win. So they don't know what it's on the other side, the abyss, if they give away their national, their structural nationalism. And that is why many shy back to the familiar, the nation-state egoism, even if it has become precarious. See the global crisis. Transformative learning is a nice and important concept, but it can also trigger worries and lead people to not want to change anything, even though we should change everything. You may recall, as an example, how great the hope was at the beginning of the corona pandemic, that such an incursion into our everyday practices would be a learning experience, a global learning experience, so that we might return to a simpler, more ecological, more solidaristic way of living, based on less consumption and more relationship. The French scientist Quentin Hardy hoped for an angel's leap, an angel's jump over the abyss. Today, we have to admit that we have not taken the chance to transform our way of life. and that everything will go back to the way it was before. Perhaps even more hectic because we have to catch up. One of the most important theorists of learning is still John Dewey, who understood experience as an important step of learning. But it would not be enough. Experience requires reflection. Dewey put it this way: when we have an experience, or when we do an experience, because it's very close to having and doing experiences, we have an aha moment. Aha, that's how it works. I have now understand how the problem could be solved. That's an experience. To really learn from this experience, we need to reflect back from the aha moment to the situation that forced or generated that experience. We have to reflect back from the aha moment, from the moment of success to the moment or to the process of trying and error, and to the origin of the problem, to develop a solution which is sustainable also for the next problem. So in education, we would need much more spaces in time and room for doing and reflecting experiences. This means also organizing the education settings in a way that I can risk the angel's jump over the abyss, in secure settings, without worrying to be false, to do wrong, trusting in the process of learning without giving too much importance to the output which is not in our hand. Can such learning succeed in educational settings that are hierarchically structured, that reproduce patriarchal patterns of domination, in which learning is not appreciated as experience in its process of discovering, but it's measured and evaluated by the output of predetermined performances categories? Our school spaces are not experiential spaces in which trial and error remain harmless, but are permeated by the dichotomous categories of right, wrong, reward, punishment, gifted, minor gifted, normal, disabled, and, according to Pierre Bourdieu, promote and reject children by the habitus they bring with them to school from unequal living conditions and carry with them throughout their school career and their school life. A critical stimulus in these directions are the recent strategy papers of the educational institutions of the United Nations and also the European Union. The Global Education Network Europe, GENI, is currently working on the further development of the Maastricht Declaration of 2002 into a declaration on global education 2050, or education futures for the futures of education. We see the draft on the screen. Emphasize cooperation, collaboration, and solidarity. Reimagine schools, including architectures, spaces, times, timetables, and student groupings in diverse ways. The concepts were and are there, but so far the paper has been very patient. And we should come to the point that paper should become impatient, unpatient, and do the step from the paper to the concrete doing. So what can we do concrete in education, considering all our limits? A habitus reflexive and those difference reflexive training for educators in all contexts is a minimum requirement. But in a school conceived according to structures of division, the engagement of teacher often fails because of the structures that dictate the opposite. Hierarchy instead of shared discovering, learning, performance output instead of process orientation. This all is a powerful hidden curriculum that obscures and devalues the social differences and the different potentials of learners beyond the given categories. In the same way, it is difficult to demand from schools and other educational settings that the division of the world according to the national units and political economic spheres of influence should be abolished in a citizenship of the earth. If the mononational and monolingual habitus of the nation state is politically imposed and prevails also in schools. It's a contradiction. For education that wants to be transformative, this means placing experiential spaces in schools and all other educational settings above the abstract transmission of knowledge and reproduction of knowledge. This is widely preached, but we are far from it. If education must be transformative for the year 2015, it must first transform itself. A new understanding of knowledge is for that essential. For that, in the project Transform for School, which is showing on the screen, and we are working on it at our university, we try out a strict participatory and experience-based approach to empower students, pupils, and all stakeholders in school life as citizen scientists. Education as a participatory process of being citizen, also as learner, a citizen scientist. Such an approach puts the focus on a fundamental rethinking of the school through the involvement of all actors in the design of the school, but also in conceptualizing knowledge. What is the knowledge we have to learn and what is the knowledge we need to resolve the global crisis? Taking into account the social environment and power relations that permeate the school as a social space. The dominant understanding of science and knowledge in the Western world is a concept of division, here represented by the myth of the spherical androgens divided by God Zeus into binary male and female humans. It's of course a metaphor for the presence of dividing thinking. Knowledge is strictly divided according to subjects. The interrelations are lost. The reality behind and beyond the subjects are lost, are out of view. This thinking in strictly separated categories is very successful. We have to admit this and we have to consider this. It dominates the world, but also divides the world. Dichotomous divisions have the consequence that we think things completely separate from each other. And by this, connections and overlappings go lost. We see it on cultural divisions, which often still hide racialized imaginations of the others, versus transcultural reality, because cultures are interwoven. We see it on the division men-women, which make lived identity designs between or beyond binary role models very difficult. Dichotomous divisions always create hierarchies. The separated halves do not remain in the balance, but lead to dominance and subordination. So we do have people who are worth more and those who have less rights. We have a global north that takes all liberties to exploit the global south, but at the same time does not even perceive that it destroys itself with its dominance, its consumption of resources, its outsourcing of all problems to the global south. Education that wants to be transformative must first of all address critically the dichotomies in our thinking. It's not possible to overcome them. They are too powerful for that, too successful. They make the world less complex. But it is possible to weaken them, to bring them into a a diffuseness, to unsharpen them, thereby to flatten hierarchies, to strengthen overlaps and commonalities, to enable solidarity. Because the others, the abstract other, the other as nature, the other half of the world, the other as foreigners, are not so completely different from us, because in weakened and unsharpened dichotomies, we can perceive the connections again, and thereby also empathize with the suffering half of the world, with the suffering people and the creatures below us. As long as we can separate them from us as another culture, as another part of the world, as foreigners who have nothing to do with us, we can continue to participate in destruction without much scruples. These may be harsh words. They simply say that we still find colonialist positions in dealing with knowledge, learning and education, which are explained by history, also history of education. There is a connection between the so-called civilization of the wild child and the so-called civilization of the so-called white people in the epoch of enlightenment, the great history of our education systems, which still is working till today. The child and the indigenous people were considered from a position of domination as objects of a necessary subordination by force to make them, according to even the wise Kant, human beings. Man can become man only through education. He is nothing but what education makes of him. Discipline or breeding changes animalism into humanity. It is also seen in the savage nations. With them, however, this is not a noble inclination to freedom, as Rousseau and others think, but a certain crudeness, in that the animal here has not yet, as it were, developed humanity in itself. And by this, going further, we have to do it by force. We have to humanize them by force. And we know which crimes would be done following such ideas. And this thinking, of course, in a more subtle way, continues to have an effect till now, when children and young people are measured on their educational path by how they acquire given knowledge in a predefined way for the exact measurement on the next test, only to forget it again as quickly as possible. This thinking continues to have an effect when children and young people are measured on reaching a predefined target, and by this are always in deficit, because most of all, none are reaching the highest level. I don't have focused on future challenges for education like artificial intelligence in this presentation, ChatGPT and so on, because we don't know how these techniques will evolve. But only what we know now about the developments, it seems more than clear that collecting and reproducing the already available knowledge will not be the way of the future. We have to go further. We have to use our creativity, our sense of discovering, and not the reproduction of knowledge which machines are doing in that much better than we can. There are also counter models in education to this mainstream of reproducing knowledge. I myself advocate a phenomenological approach. The phenomenological understanding of learning tries to shift the view from the output of education to the process, and is very bodily and experience orientated. In this way, children and adolescents and adults are not measured efficiently by whether they achieve or not a given standard of performance that lumps everyone together, but are accompanied and appreciated in their learning processes with their possibilities, with their different talents. Working with indigenous groups in Canada and South America, Vanessa Andreotti, we see her in this picture, a scientist, has developed the concept of education for the deaf in a similar way. This works with experiences. It deepens individual bodies of knowledge in a participatory way. It respects personal approaches to this knowledge. And while an education for mastery always tends to become an education for conquest by conquering knowledge in order to subjugate the world, education for depth works on the connections between humans and the world, humans and animals, humans and nature, us and the other. Choose an education for futures would actually be sketched out in a few strokes, away from a knowledge that subjugates and dominates, towards a knowledge that is gained from experience, from putting oneself in relationship, in relation to the subject matter by means of experience, in relation between teachers and learners as a non-monodirectional process, but an interaction process, a non-hierarchical process, but a participatory process, in relation to the others, whoever they are. And I think we should try it. There are some, yes, there are only a few bullets for repeating the concept I have tried to explain. Doing and reflecting experience, participatory approaches versus hierarchical settings, relationship and empathy versus mastery and conquest, unsharpening binary divisions of knowledge and worldview. Thank you for your attention. And thank you so much that I could participate at this lecture series also only by according, hoping there would be other opportunities, other occasions to get into real face-to-face exchange, because it's very important to work together. And the questions I have tried to reflect from the perspective of education. There may be also other perspectives, and it's important to bring them together and work for yes, transforming society, transforming the ways we are dealing with knowledge, with science, and the ways we are dealing with each other and the other as nature, as other humans, as humans from another culture, and as also in the world as a whole. Thank you very much. Goodbye. And I wish you a good discussion.
Yeah, this was the lecture pre-recorded by Karl Peterlini, the UNESCO Chair in Global Citizen Education at the University of Klagenfurt. It was, in my view, a quite profound and encompassing lecture. And I would like to apologize for the technical problems we faced at the start and the rather mediocre quality of the video, but nevertheless, I think it was an important impulse in a series. The future of education is indeed regarded as a key for many other revolving processes of the moment. And I think it is a wide consensus that we need a new, more globally informed, locally adapted education. Many today assert that parts of education have lost contact with the great topics of humanity, that it has to be renewed. Many face the challenge on all levels of education, from primary and even kindergarten up to the tertiary system, that the institutions are very hard to reform. The institutions are very stubborn in their self-preservation, so progress is slow. Nevertheless, this is not the only challenge. We also have competing educational models, for example, and the authoritarian model from China that is exported to the global south in quite efficient manners. So we are not the only model anymore, not even UNESCO, the United Nations. And it's also true what Hans-Karl said, that United Nations, UNESCO, and even the Sustainable Development Goals are often criticized. Some say an 18th goal is needed for educational purposes, the democratization of algorithms. Others say all this is too general. The United Nations by themselves are too abstract and too generalistic, and also too optimistic, because they want to be a platform for all participants in the world. That makes it a little bit seem to have taken off the realities on the ground. So all this might be true, and all this has to be taken into account when we want to reform global education. But we indeed propose task forces in different countries on a joint level, interconnected, to reform the educational systems in Germany, in Italy, in Austria, perhaps even in France, and in other countries of Central Europe and beyond. And we can only hope that Hans-Karl, who is really a pioneer in Central Europe in renewing education, together with us all as UNESCO chairs, succeeds in giving renewal impulses to the educational system in the sense of a more local approach and a more timely approach, a preparatory approach that leads us to be prepared for the coming years, for the new challenges that without doubt expect us. With all this, I thank you very much for the participation. I don't see any particular questions from your side. Should you have any questions that come to your mind later on, just don't hesitate, please, to ask them, to write us, or to put them in the chat function. We will then forward them as your feedback to Hans-Karl, who will certainly validate and evaluate them highly, and then perhaps even evaluate them and be back with some answers. With all this, I thank you very much, and would just remind you that our next lecture is on the 11th of July. So in 2 weeks from now, it will be about scenarios of 2050 and the role of art. And with this, I thank you all for being part of this lecture series. Please be back in 2 weeks from now with a Greek colleague who will talk about the world in 2050 and the role of art. Thank you very much for being with us. See you next time. Bye-bye.